All right, hi everyone. Good afternoon. Can everyone in the room hear me now?
Oh,
all right, thank you. Nah, couldn't quite hear what's going on in the room there. All right, so while the rest of you are doing that, I'll just start my presentation now. So thank you very much for being here. Just to give you guys a bit of background, so I used to be a student at the University of Melbourne as well. So I did my Bachelor of Arts in International Relations, and I did my Master's in Management and Finance. And from there, I've actually been working in Singapore. So I used to work as a research associate in an econometrics think tank in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy before joining Holistics as the chief of staff. And I also used to be a Cainz alum and committee member. So it's great to actually be working with the Cainz team again today. All right, so let me just get that screen a little wider. Okay, so just to give a bit of background into who we are and maybe the purpose of the course today. So I think a lot of you would probably know that big data is a growing field, and it's an area that a lot of people have a lot of hype over. They're not quite sure what it exactly means. There's a lot of buzz terms going around. So I'm hoping that today we can demystify some of these things. So just to get a show of hands in the room, can I understand how many of you are Excel users? Can you raise your hand? Okay, lots of Excel users. Okay, so how many of you have ever used a database before? Can you raise your hands? All right, so not so many over there. All right, so today I'm going to give you guys a bit of a overview of some of the key concepts, as well as how it actually works on the platform. So you'll be having a live demonstration for you to sign into. All right, so Holistics was created about 2 years ago, well 3 now, in 2015. And we've worked with a lot of startups from around the region and all over the world. So about 50% in Southeast Asia, 50% in the rest of the world, Europe, the United States. There might be some logos here that might be familiar to some of you. People like Grab, Traveloka, they are unicorns in Southeast Asia. And so really data is something that cuts across many industries. So it's really not quite industry specific. So that's something you'll find out, that as long as you know how to work with data, you'll be able to apply it as long as you have the technology and the tools to do so. And so these are some of the highlights of the Holistics story. So the interesting story was that how Holistics was created was thanks to our CTO, Huy Nguyen, who was actually voted Forbes 30 under 30 in Vietnam as well as Asia, when he was actually working in a video startup called Bitesize, and he realized that there wasn't the right tools available to do what he wanted. Things like maybe Tableau didn't manage to get the job done for the sorts of data engineering work that he needed. So he set about creating this platform that has now since evolved into a tool that allows anyone really to perform the functions of a full data team. So all the way from data engineering through to data visualizations, you no longer need to be a specialist to be able to do the full suite. And this is an example of a pretty well-known startup called Grab. So this is an example of their data stack. So on the left side, what you'll see is their MySQL database setup moving over into a big data warehouse, which can then be connected to the different tools like R, Holistics, Tableau, and Spark for their data operations. So this is really a case where a team that builds a tool like this is actually able to scale to over 1,000 users. So when Grab first started with us, they had only about 15 users on the platform, and now they have over 1,000 using it on a daily basis. And just a bit of a case study of what they've done with us. So really what we're trying to do is to make data accessible. And I guess that's the purpose of this lesson today as well, just to help people understand how data can actually be a more painless process when it comes to working with it, to demystify it. So I'm sure many of us all are familiar with, being able to just pick up our smartphones, search Google for anything you want, order things on apps. And so that's something we already expect. We expect immediate delivery. We immediately expect things to just happen. We want things to get things done as quick as possible, and now technology has allowed us to do that. But the reality is this, that when it comes to data in a company, it might not actually be that smooth after all, because a lot of times it's not as easy as searching a Google search bar to figure out what's going on in your company. Let's say, how's your sales performance, how your team's doing out on the field. But that's what we actually want. So how do we get closer to that end state? So some research has actually been gathered on the size of the business intelligence and the data analytics market, as well as the effectiveness of such tools in a company. And so more than 3,000 CIOs, Chief Information Officers that were surveyed, ranked analytics and business intelligence as the most impactful technology inside their companies. So really what we're going to be seeing through today is how do we actually build this process? How do we allow, using a tool, data tool such as Holistics, to dig into the performance of a business, to understand what the causes are, to create reports that you can actually distribute to your operations teams, to your marketing teams, so that they can make faster decisions and access live data from the database without even knowing that they're actually accessing their data infrastructure. So this is quite a useful diagram to sort of think about the issue. So a lot of times, all the things that we hear about, and I'll be very curious to hear from the students in the room actually. So can some of you share what are your thoughts about data analytics? What do you think in terms of, what are the first things that you think about when people say data, big data to you? Interesting, great. So some people said advertising. Yes, there's a lot of data when it comes to advertising. Consumer insights, absolutely, but it really depends on what kind of data you have. And big data being difficult to manage, that is exactly what the mystique is around this topic that's been built up. So if you actually take a look at the diagram of how you actually break that down, users see a lot of times, let's say you're working in a large company and all you see are reports on how's the business performance doing, some key metrics or some charts. Those sort of reports and the data science and the machine learning visualizations, those are only 20% of the problem. But the real 80% of the problem comes with the data preparation. You're trying to extract data, we're trying to load data into a database, you're trying to filter, you're processing it, you're transforming it. And so I'm going to give you guys a sense of what those problems are like and how they can actually be tackled in a really simple way and actually understand how this full process works. So this is exactly a situation of a typical process when it comes to working with data. It's going from all the way from, let's say, a platform that you download the data sets from, the CSVs. And from there, you're trying to create a report that you can build a chart or metrics with and share via email. And I kid you not, these are things that actually, in some companies, they hire people full-time to do just this. So their jobs are nothing more than to work with spreadsheets, to compile reports, build charts, and do it day in, day out. And just maybe after they finish one report, their job is to build the next report with whatever data is available. So this sort of repetition can be honestly so crushing. So I think a lot of us here would like to do meaningful work. And so what we're looking at is how we can actually make this process more automated with the digital tools that are available to us now. So maybe some of you might be thinking one day would like to build a startup of your own. So when it comes to building a startup, you start finding that there are a lot of tools out there that you're going to need. You're going to need something for, say, tracking the user behavior on your websites. You're going to need something to set up your finance and operations. Maybe you're going to use MailChimp or Intercom for marketing. And all these different platforms are generating data. But how do you take that data and make it sensible? How do you create a report with all this data together in a coherent way and to ingest it in an automatic manner? So this is really where the sort of tools that you end up using will dictate the end state that your business will arrive at. So think about it this way, that the sort of data that you collect and the tools that you use to manage that are going to inform the hiring decisions you make in terms of the people that you use to manage that data. And it becomes a cycle. So a lot of times, in large companies, they might have a situation where they start using a data tool that they were sold at a premium price, thinking it was able to tackle the problems they needed. But over time, they realize that, hey, this is actually resulting in a lot of different dependencies across their organization, and this becomes magnified as the company grows. So really what we're going to be talking about today is how do we create accessibility and autonomy of data. All right, so maybe I'll just jump ahead into a quick demonstration of a full process, and then from there we can go into the live working examples. So let me just stop that screen share here. And all right, let's go from here. Okay. All right, so what I'm showing you over here is the Holistics platform, and I'm going to show you what a typical process would be like inside the Holistics platform for ingesting going all the way out to a report. So let's say over here, we've got a Google spreadsheet of data that we want to move in. So from there, we just need to take that URL. And so in Holistics, what it does is that it first requires you to have a database connected. And so once you have that, so let's say, for example, I have a database here where I can see what sort of data I have inside. So some of this data could be generated from an application. So let's say you're using a smartphone app and a lot of data is being created that's loaded into the database. Or maybe you have spreadsheets that your different teams are working on. Then you can actually move that into the same database to build the reports you need. So that will be a process that previously would require trained data engineers and a bit of coding. But in this environment, you can actually do it instantly with a few clicks. So be it data from spreadsheets, from CSV files, from one database to another, and a few other sources, you can actually do this. So now this has actually detected the data that was in that spreadsheet. And now we can just move this into a database. And we can schedule that to happen on, say, a weekly basis. Validate. And we execute. And from there, we'll be able to tell once that's done. And from there, then we'll be able to go over into actually building a report. So this is what happens when you've actually been able to pull data in a database. And that's actually, as a company grows, it's going to have more and more tables. Maybe there'll be several tables for employee data, several for customer data, and several for purchases that are made. So from there, how do you actually take all this and make sense of it together? So let's have a look at this table that we just created here, that we just loaded into the database. All right, great. So now that we have that there, we can just click Query Table. So this is a process we'll be doing together during the demonstration. And I'll be explaining to you a bit about what SQL is as well. So once you have that, let's say we want to build a column chart. So we can have a date field. So maybe we could say like day, and we can just change this. Maybe we can use the closing price and the opening price. And from there, we have a report. We can save that. And from there, then that's the first report we've created in just a few clicks. And for example, we could schedule this as Slack. So it's a matter of how do you create. So the stages of reporting using data would be from the full suite of what I showed you, of starting with the data preparation and the loading, the ETL, extracting, transforming, and loading of data into a database. then the actual query building, which was the analyze tab, which I showed you. And now the final step would just be to deliver the reports. So it could be via email, it could be via Slack, and so on. So for example, from here, we do a Slack. So that's right there. Do it daily. All right, sounds good. Save that. Let's send that. So now what we're going to see is that if we actually share that screen, you can just look over here. Seems to be a bit of bandwidth issue. And there we go. So we've got a chart that's been sent and it's report into Slack for you to access and open and to be able to show your team. So what I've shown you there is actually the full process in a very simplified manner. And so now I'm going to explain to you a bit more of the actual concepts that actually go behind what we just saw and what actually makes it work. Let's look over here. All right. So first of all, let's start here. So we're going to start with a database and SQL before we go into hands-on examples here. So I'm sure many of you would have heard of companies like AWS, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud. So what they're providing, and in fact, a lot of the developments we've seen around us recently are thanks to the innovations from companies such as Amazon. Really, Amazon is actually the main market player when it comes to distributed services and databases. And of course, then it will be followed by Microsoft, and then finally Google. So Google is actually not really capturing much of the market share at this moment. But the reality is that previously, it used to be that companies would do these setups on-premise inside their own office space. So you might have to rent a whole floor for your servers and to build stuff that actually was very capital intensive. But what's happened here is now with cloud computing, with services like AWS, they've made it very accessible for anyone to have access to infrastructure such as this from wherever they are. That's why I'm actually based in Ho Chi Minh right now for a work trip. And I can work with my team here that is using one of these services to be able to build a company that's serving the whole world. So now anyone can actually build a company that's global with such services. So if you think about it this way, if you have a look at some of these logos over here. So two of the most popular database services at the moment are PostgreSQL and MySQL. And these are really some of the terms that you might have heard before, because if you hear about companies like Oracle, what they did was that back in the day, they would develop some database systems built on MySQL to roll out to companies and charge them exorbitant prices. So a lot of actual companies are still stuck with that sort of legacy infrastructure that they're trying to move away from now towards things like the cloud and Amazon. And so two of the big fast-growing big data warehouses are Amazon Redshift and Google BigQuery. And these are actually what a data warehouse is. You can think of it as a more large database that's optimized for processing data or for analytics purposes. And of course, there are many of these others. So things like MongoDB has become very popular for people to build applications on, but that's in a NoSQL format, and I'll explain what some of these are. And Qubole works on Presto and Hive clusters. So some of these are just terms that you might have heard of before, but let's try and unpack some of those ideas. So really, if you think of it, many of you said before that you use Excel. So what a database is, you can think of as a whole collection of many folders of Excel tables. And that would probably be a good way to just start thinking about it. So for example, over here, you can think of it as, say, the idea of databases when it comes to tech companies. There's the idea of a production database. So think about it when you're using your phone apps. When you key in information about the orders you want, when you talk about when you order some food, or maybe you're trying to hire a taxi, all that information gets captured and is being sent to a production database where they're actually able to push it live. And from there, what you do then is to actually move data from there into things like a staging or reporting database for you to actually allow your team to work with, because you don't want your company's staff to actually disrupt the running of your app on a day-to-day basis. So all these steps, it's actually very engineering intensive. So next I'm going to explain to you what SQL is. And another show of hands, please. How many of you have heard of SQL before today? Interesting. Okay, great. So thanks for that. So this is where I feel that there is a gap in the current understanding of data and how it's taught and what's actually happening in the workplace. So maybe before this, you would have thought that data is a lot about statistics, and it's a lot about maybe machine learning even. But really, a key part of it is actually the ability to work with the database to extract the data you need. And the most, this SQL is nothing new. SQL's been around for many decades, and it's a tested and proven technology and language that is in fact probably the most important skill that you need as a data analyst, or if you want to work with data in a meaningful way on an ongoing basis. So a lot of the things that you see, things like Tableau, things like data tools, what they're really doing is building SQL queries on the back without revealing it to the users. And as long as you want to work with a database in some way, in some form, there's SQL inside that technology. So SQL is what it stands for. It's Structured Query Languages. And what it does is that it gives you a way of database. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you what some of the most basic SQL queries are and how to understand it. And once you do, the interesting thing is this. In our experience, a lot of the data analysts that we have encountered are not actually computer science students. They actually come from arts backgrounds, they come from business backgrounds, and what they need is the ability to think of a business logic and translate that into queries, or maybe even say some proprietary modelings, languages that allows you to work with the data in your database to be able to translate something that's just integers, strings, text, numbers, variable characters into something that's sensible, into something they can use, in something that's operational. So this is exactly where I'll have it start with the live session. All right, so today what I'm going to show you, so I actually do have a video that I'll perhaps be able to share on the Facebook page, but what I'm going to demonstrate is that a lot of times people think that creating databases, working with them, sounds like a very technical and difficult thing. I'm going to show you right now how simple it is. So this isn't a step that you'll need to follow, but it's just for you to see how simple it can be. So let me just go right over to this. Okay. All right. So, of course, you could always build something on Amazon or Google, but just to show how simple it can be to get started, there's this service called Elephant SQL that allows you to build a database in a few seconds. So this is exactly how I'm gonna show you, and you can do it for free, really. So if any of you have a project you're interested to work with some data tools on, you could start by using something like this. So I'm gonna just call this an empty database, all right? And so let's just select a region. And from there, so I could say, all right, so do I want AWS, Google, Azure? So let's create an AWS database. And right there, done, create. I've just created a cloud database right there. So now what that's going to allow me to do is if I click right over here, this is what's going to allow me to work with holistics. So over here on the manage screen, what I'll do is that I'll actually create a data source. So I'll call that, I can call it anything. I call it the Cainz actually let's call it new database. And from here, I select the database type. So what you saw was a PostgreSQL database. So we go back to that screen. So over here, what's the host? The host is this. And what's the port? The port a common port for databases is 5432. So it's just all there. And the name right there. And the password. And test that connection. Let's see. Where has it gone? Okay, there we go. So that's how simple it is to actually create a database and connect it to data tools like Tableau, like Power BI, like Holistics to be able to start with your data reporting automation. So now let's start off with the first basic SQL command, select star from a table. All right, so now I want everyone to just head on over to the Analyze tab. And under data source, select Cainz DB. All right, so once you're there, so the basic command is select star from a table. So what you can see over here is that there are these different tables in the database. So for example, let's take this table called user and let's just click this button called analyze. And right away, we have this situation where you can actually see what is the data inside that table, and you pull it up and you can start building visualizations, or you could go further from there. So that's a basic command that you can try writing yourself even. So just to give a bit of explanations, okay, maybe we'll leave that for later. But all right, so I think that step should be quite straightforward. And any of you, if you've got your Cainz Holistics platform in front of you, should have been able to do that. So if you forget how to type select star from table, you can always just click analyze to pull it up. But that's the basic command that's going to be informing most of your queries. So think of it that way. So if you break down that statement, it says select star means all, select all of the available columns from this table called public.user. So public is the folder, or what you call schema, and user is the name of the table. So this is how we managed to pull out this data here. So let's say if I wanted to analyze this instead, I click that and say select star from public.usage, and we'll just load that data instead. So that's the basic command that you can use. All right, and so the next one here. All right, so similarly to what we just did before, so now let's have a look over here. So select two columns from a table. So go back to select this. So now let's say we have a table with so many columns, but let's say we only want a few of these columns. How would we do that? All right, let's just let it run. So I think right now what's happened is that I think some of you have fired the query off, and so that's why these queries are going to take a while to run. So if you think about it as in the room, what each of you were doing to hit a select star query, that query is being sent to this database somewhere in Ireland, which is actually going to tell them, okay, I want you to withdraw this data for us to display. And so with 30 of us firing queries at the same time, it was going to slow down the performance. And that's actually something that will be a lot more of an issue at scale, but just something interesting to think about. Okay, so let's say I want to just look at customer ID and customer name. So all we have to do here, so you have to be precise about how it's spelled here. So you might notice that these are all in lowercase. And that's actually a specific thing for databases. Most databases can only accept lowercase and underscores, no spaces. And so, for example, let's say if that's not the case, and it was something like, customer ID, then technically if you type this, the database would not recognize that. But if you put it between quotation marks as a string, then the database can process that. So this is just one of those finer points when it comes to speaking to a database in a way they'll understand. But because this is fine, maybe it's best practice. It's good to just do that. So let's go customer ID, and you have to put a comma there. and you put, so it's suggesting what it is, but I'm just going to do this, customer underscore name. And so a good practice here, just to make sense of a statement, is to select all that you typed and hit format selected, just so you have a sense of how things are breaking down. So once I run this, what we're going to see is the columns customer ID and customer name appearing, just the two. So, okay, so for easy reference, you can just look at the left here. Instead of going back to the old select star query, you could always add one more in. And so now I'm going to show you without quotation marks, but just remember that having quotation marks is actually best practice in these sense. So let's say I want role, I want status. Let's hit that. Okay, and so now I'm going to explain a very common mistake that a lot of people make. Do not put a comma at the end of the final column. If I did that, it will not work. So the issue here is just sometimes, and that's the funny thing, so some of you might not even be familiar with coding, but a lot of times it just takes a single wrong space, a single wrong punctuation mark, and things break. So do keep that in mind. All right, so now I'm going to give you guys the next level down. So SQL is a very logical, construct. So what I've shown you before, where it's about selecting columns from a table, all right, that seems quite straightforward. So how about this situation now, where we have a condition that we want to say, for example, where a date where it's a specific date, or maybe where a value equals to something in particular. So let's go back here. So let's go back to the main select star, just to bring us back to the basic understanding there. So now let's say we have a situation here with all this data. Let's say I want to pick out all the values or rows where the role is only admin, not analysts and not users. So all we have to do there is what is called a where statement. So if you look at this, where the condition is such, so I could say where admin. And now you see straight away that role that has been selected is only admin roles. So let's format that so it's easier for people to read. All right. So of course, as you saw before, there were other roles that we could actually select as well, like analyst and user. So all you have to do is just keep building a list. And again, it's important to use quotation marks because that tells you that this data is a string type. Because if you don't put the quotation marks there, so for example, if I click this out, database would not be able to recognize that. Because it'll think it's a column rather than actual values. So let's click that. Yep, so now we have a situation where the role, analyst, and admin. And of course, you could always just add other conditions. So for example, first thing we did there was for roles. I could say, and customer ID in. All right, so a lot of times when it comes to coding and SQL, it's good to experiment. So let's say, for example, I want to find only people with customer ID values of 5. Let's see what happens when we do that. Yep, so it doesn't work there. So it has to be a string. And see now we have a situation where you pulled out all the records who have an admin role, an analyst role, and the customer ID values are 5. So you can see it's a very logical language, like I said. So it's something that you'd be able to just keep adding on additional conditions to build and pull out the data that you need and create reports that you need for your business users, for your company, for yourself. All right, so now let's go to the, what I'll say, the final level. All right, so this is where we build a condition where some of you might be asking, everything we've been doing has been only on a single table. What happens when we have 2 tables? All right, so don't get confused by what's over here first, but let me show you how we build it from scratch. All right, so let's go back to analyze. Okay. All right. Let's see, did that. Did that. All right. So what I'm going to show you is what you'll do if you're trying to combine two tables here. We've got a user table and a usage table that both have customer ID values. So this is as long as you know that these two tables share the same, what they call a key that actually links both these tables, you can join them on those keys. So let's start with select server public.user, and let's give that left join public.usage on. Okay, so this is where it's interesting. So a database like Postgres actually allows you to simplify things. So the full form should be public.user.customerID equals public.usage.customerID. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to abbreviate it. So I'm going to just call this user UR, and this can be usage UG. So I can say on UR.customerID equals to UG.customerID. Let's format that so it's easier to read. Now let's run this. So now we'll see that it's taken values from the user table, all of that, created that, and it's actually added all the values from the second table as well, called usage, customer name, widget, drill downs. So this is what happens when, two questions that will come up here usually. So an important one, this concept of joining different tables is the bulk of a lot of, how would you put it, grief for a lot of people. So imagine when you're trying to do joins over multiple tables across a large database for a company, that's when a query could take ages to run. So it could be something like, in some of the customers, running a single query can take 3 hours. So these are things that you have to consider when it comes to performance issues with the database. But over here, so this key idea of a join is what's going to allow you to pull data from different tables. And one thing that some of you who might be familiar about data tools might ask about data blending across database joins. So typically what happens is that that's not actually technically. Can I take a table in one database with a table in another database and just join them straight away on the platform? The answer is no, because actually technically, to be able to, all the data needs to be residing in the same data source. So on some way or form, someone is actually doing that and moving data to allow for that sort of join that I just built over here. So that's something where the user experience might be very different from the technicalities behind. And a lot of times when it comes to software companies and tech companies, it's about abstracting that away without revealing the complexities underneath. So yeah, so that's pretty much the basic crash course of SQL. I think with that, you've actually understood some very important concepts of how to select columns, how to write where conditions, and how to actually build a join. And with that as a basis, there are so many free courses out there for SQL that you can learn. So if this is an area that you're interested in, definitely do that. And if any of you are interested in data, feel free to reach out to me, or even on international and remote roles even. So just to give you a sense of who we are. So we're 20 team members strong. In fact, we've got people in Singapore, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, and in San Francisco. And so these are some of the members of the team. So thanks very much for that. And I think I'll just stop over here and have a bit of a Q&A session before we need to wrap things up. I don't think we have much more time left, but sure, just feel free to ask any questions you have on this. So let's check over here. One of the Q&A questions we had was about what's the difference between Holistics, Tableau, and Power BI? The short answer is that a lot of data visualization tools only tackle the 20% problem of the iceberg. And there are other tools that tackle the 80% problem. And Holistics is one of the few that does both in a single platform. And that's actually one of the things that we believe makes sense in terms of trying to give people the full abilities to manage the whole pipeline. All right, and do we have any other questions from the audience? right, then maybe if not, then, oh, column UR.customer ID does not exist. Right, so, okay, so that might be an issue of how you typed it. So if you try maybe with quotation marks or maybe capitalizing UR, that might have worked over here. So that's a Chu Young that was asking about that. So if the abbreviation for the table was in capital U and R, then you will have to use UR.customer ID. So make sure that you're using the correct database as well, which you can see on the analyze screen. But does anyone have questions about, say, the data industry or tech, or what it's like in the life of an engineer and an analyst? Feel free to ask anything you would like to know. Sorry, we've got one question there. Do we have time for that?
Yeah.
All right, I'll go for it. So the meaning of the difference between data engineer and data analyst, you can think about it this way: of a data engineer. Okay, let me find that diagram here. And let me share the screen. Right, so really what a data engineer does, very important things, is to actually make decisions about the data infrastructure for a company. So on the simple sense of, in this specific situation we've been talking about today, what a data engineer would typically do is to create pipelines to actually take data from different places, like say maybe your Facebook ads, from a MongoDB, your Microsoft SQL Server, and to move that, import that into the reporting database. So the simplest one being the one I just showed you that I created within like 10 seconds, and the larger ones like Amazon Redshift and Google BigQuery, what we call a data warehouse. So that's really the data engineering focus. And also about making sure that that the databases that they're using are actually able to support the needs of a growing company. And then what the data analyst would do is actually to typically build the reports, build the SQL queries, build the data models that actually allow the business to be able to make sense of the data in the data warehouse. So for example, I could build a report, well, from what I showed you in Holistic, we could create a report that joins tables to actually tell us what are the marketing actions that we need to do, which users we need to follow up with, what are their email addresses, and then actually automate that report for business user to use. So this is actually something that takes 3 roles to manage: a data analyst, a data engineer, and somewhere up there, a database administrator. And so in Holistic, you can actually do all of that in a single platform, but typically in the industry, those will be separate roles.
Alrighty then, everyone, please give everyone applause to say thank you for your time. So hopefully everyone found today's workshop useful and learned a lot of new skills that we can bring either into the workplace or perhaps even thanks so much everyone for attending.
Yeah. It's been great.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. We're glad to see the familiar faces here, so keep coming back, and yeah, good to have everyone. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care, guys. Great to see you all. All the best.
Oh, thank you so much, Evan.